Hi, I am Toby from Toby's Home Sketch, and today we are doing a video about hatching. And why are we doing this? Well, because I put up a video recently, which was a sketchbook tour from January and February of this year. In it, I talked a bit about hatching and how I'd had a play through those months and whilst being on holiday with a lot of hatching techniques. And people said, please, can you tell us more? So yes, of course I can. And please, with this video, leave comments if you have questions, ask me questions, let me know what you think of it, give me other ideas. I love learning from you guys as well, so leave me a comment and I'll do my best. I pretty much always respond, so I'm sure I will. So, the first thing we want to cover in this little video is what is hatching and how to use it. So, hatching is sort of simple normally parallel lines to create a block of value. And what is value? Well, value is, if we do a little value scale, value is describing light, the lowest value, through to dark. So if we hatch along here, we can create these areas of increased value. And you can see that they're all increased value compared to the light. But then we can double up that hatching. We can go perpendicular, and we're creating an area which is higher value than this initial hatching. Then we can go at a sort of 45-degree angle. We can go diagonally, and then we can do perpendicular to that. And then lastly, we can do it very dense. We can almost black it in. We can go randomly all over the place. And now we have this scale, maybe 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of value all through hatching. So although there's white and black paper, the lines are black, the paper's white, what we've got is the idea, the visual illusion through hatching of value. That's the simplest way of thinking about hatching, but hatching is so much more than that. So with this value, what are we implying? We're implying shadows. But shadows mean more than that. So let me just demonstrate very quickly with a little cube. We've got a light coming, let's say, pointing down this way. So this is light. This is going to be 0, or maybe it's got a little bit of tone, so sort of somewhere between 0 and 1. So a couple of little hatch marks. We're loosely implying this value. Here's going to be the darkest side, so perhaps we need 1, maybe a bit more, so 2. Maybe we even want to go 3. And why are we doing 3? Because there's a shadow being cast here, which is probably a bit lighter than that side. So maybe that side is a 2. And then here we just got a 1, because the light's going to be hitting it a little bit. So we've by using value, we've got shadow, which gives us shape. So now this is a very 3D object. And why is it 3D? Because shadows and shape show us the planes. What do we mean by planes? So planes are where different sides are facing. So this side of the cube is one plane, this side is another plane, this side is another plane. You could say the floor here is the same plane as this, or because they're sort of separated in space, you could say this is two different planes as well. The other thing that hatching can do is it can bring out shapes and shadows within bigger objects. So if we have, let's say, a little tree, and you draw the tree as a kind of a 2D outline, but with a really simple bit of hatching, just in a few little places, you're implying little sort of puffy areas. You're implying that, as you do, you get little areas of leaves which puff out. You get a little area here which is puffing out. You don't have to draw these in. You can just imply them loosely with hatching. Now for me, I use hatching like this. I tend to not do much cross hatching. I tend to use just vertical hatching or hatching which is just all in one layer per plane. And what do I mean by one layer per plane? Well, so here we've got all our different planes facing different directions. Now if I do a sort of, let's call it a real life example of a house, what I might do is just use vertical hatching for the house. And then under the eaves, where it's darker, I'll use vertical hatching, but I'll make it a bit closer together. Now, instead of using vertical hatching for the shadow here, I'll change it because the plane's different. So I'll change the angle of the hatching to show that now we've got a plane facing that way instead of facing sort of straight out at us. So I don't necessarily cross hatch, but I vary my hatching to vary the planes. So now things are getting more complicated, aren't they? Because we've got hatching showing value, and the value alone can show planes, but also you can just be a bit more creative, a bit more different. You can show the planes by the direction of the hatching and just do a different density of hatching all in one direction to show the different value. So I hope this is making sense, because I appreciate that I could be waffling to myself into the ether. I must say at this point, any questions, just pop them down in the comments, or if you want a future video to elaborate on anything, pop it down in the comments. Now, the next bit I want to talk about, and I'll do it on this page, is instead of thinking about planes, thinking about layers. And this is another thing I love using hatching for. So if we have a lovely little landscape where we've got a big mountain, and then in front of that we've got another mountain, then in the foreground we've got a tree, and why not another house. And so now we've kind of got 3 or 4 planes, or 3 or 4 layers, sorry. So we've got the foreground, then we've got the middle, then we've got the background, then we've got the sky. So how can we separate those out? Well, one simple way is with hatching. So we go along the kind of background and we just hatch that. And it doesn't have to be everywhere. We can vary that hatching a little bit. We can imply shadow and shape within it, so much like this tree. But by applying that sort of relatively uniform hatch, it's pushed that layer back, it's separated it from the other layers. We could then do horizontal hatching in this layer, or we could stick with vertical hatching and bring it forward. So we can skip a layer. So if we leave this middle layer, instead of trying to separate it with another direction of hatching, we leave it negative space. Then in the foreground, we could go back to vertical hatching, and we could do the same as over here. We can get this kind of directional shadow. We can vary the shadow a bit. And now we've separated out these layers. And then, if we wanted, we could even do something a bit more abstract, and we could push the sky back with some horizontal hatching. And the reason the sky has to be horizontal, not vertical, is because that layer is next to this layer. The sky is next to the background. So if it was all vertical, it would connect them. It wouldn't separate them. It would connect them. And we want them separated. So now we've got 3 things, haven't we? We've got value, which is shadow, which is planes, but also layers. Okay, so now we're starting to separate out our hatching from really the true value, which is what most people think about it, because this isn't necessarily darker. What we're doing is we're manipulating our image. We're making an artistic decision to apply hatching to push it away, to change it. And what else can hatching do? Well, hatching can do all sorts. It can just be interesting and fun to experiment. It produces contrast. That's obvious. So this is much darker than that. There's a big contrast. So it produces contrast. It produces interest. It means you can move the viewer's eye around. So another little doodle to demonstrate. If we do a little lighthouse, really simple, silly little lighthouse, and maybe it's got some rocks here. Rocks that are leading down to the sea. Got a little window and a window here. We don't really know what to look at. It's a fun little doodle, but yeah, it's not clear what's going on, is it? And we can start to separate that, so we can do that little bit of hatching. But we can also do hatching on the light side just to get that sort of texture and grubby feel. So that's the texture. We can do our little shadow over here just to show. But we can also really cross over that hatching a bit and create some contrast, some real point of difference between the land and the lighthouse. We can also do some really dense hatching in the windows, leaving a little bit of reflected light, but again showing that there is something interesting going on here. The eye is drawn and then pushed away from these windows. You could do the same in some of these rocks. So we could block in some of those rocks, which is essentially very dense hatching. And that just pushes your eye. You sort of follow this trail and you leads you down to perhaps this is where you spent a long time drawing a lovely boat. So you want people to look down here. And then the boat can be flattened by applying a loose hatch to it, showing that it's a foreground layer, or perhaps pushing it backwards. So this is my sort of 101 on simple hatching, why I use it, how I use it, and the kind of things I aim to achieve with it. Here's a bit which needs to touch.